welcome back to the We've All Been There podcast, episode 5. We are just killing the game here. We're just doing all the things.
Yeah.
We're so excited that you're with us again. I hope you enjoyed the bonus episode we released this month, but we wanted to go ahead and get you another episode already. So if you're checking us out for the very first time, make sure you check out all of our previous episodes on Spotify, Apple, and then we also got YouTube. So we got all the options for you. Make sure to check us out. We've All Been There podcast. So back again.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Go on there and subscribe so that it just comes real fast to you and you can get all that. I'm excited about this month and diving into this. You know, we've all been there. And so that's kind of what this podcast is about, is just trying to be relatable, trying to say, man, what are some of the things that we've probably all experienced, especially in leadership, and just kind of be real with the topics and lean into the in-betweens. I know, man, a lot of times as preachers, we can get super binary. Like we always do this or we always do that, or we never do this or we never do that. But we realize like real life is kind of found in the in-betweens. And so that's kind of what we're doing in this series, or in this podcast, series of podcasts, I guess, is just kind of leaning into those in-between times and talking about some of those subjects. And so, hey, for this episode, we're headed into summer, man. It's by the time this comes out, it will be already into the month of June, and school will be out. Kids are out, all kinds of fun summer plans. So how about you, Max? You got any good, big summer plans?
Well, I just got back from Europe.
You did, I mean,
I feel like that's my pre-vacation to the summer. Got to experience Italy and France, and so that's my first time in Europe.
That's awesome. You guys look like you belonged, man. We were just watching your stories and stuff on Instagram and going, oh man, you and Amy just look like you fit right in there. It's perfect for you. It looked like it was a great time. And that's kind of what a youth pastor has to do too, is kind of, vacation time comes a little bit before summer, because I know you got a lot of summer plans with youth group and things
camp,
like that too. So
missions trip. Yeah, we're going to be busy.
Trip. Definitely. So I'm glad you got to do that and experience it. I'm excited about summer. It's really probably my favorite time of year, actually. Wow. Yeah, I like the warmer weather, even when it gets hot. I don't mind that so much. I like wearing golf shirts, as you can tell. I think every one of these podcasts, I'm wearing a golf shirt. But I enjoy just the casualness of summer. I love the time with my family. I love vacation. We take a vacation every single year. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small. This year, we're just going to Arkansas. My folks have a place up there, and so we're going to go stay, and the whole family's going. And now I got a new son-in-law who's coming with us as well. Yeah. And then Addie's boyfriend, Dylan, will be going up with us, and we're going to have a great time. So yeah, it will be a full house, but it'll be fun, and I'm looking forward to it. That's just a few weeks away. So do you have a favorite vacation memory, or maybe favorite spot that you like to? Maybe it's Europe. I don't know. You just came back, but what's one of your favorite memories or spots you like?
If it's not Europe, I would say going to Denver. We went for our honeymoon, and you probably think he's going to talk about the weather. He's going to talk about the food. He's going to talk about the other thing. No, I'm going to talk about our Airbnb.
Yeah,
because this shower that we had had 3 different heads on it. So it was just water from all sides. I'm drowning in this shower. I'm like, can we bring this home?
Yes.
I'm I would rent this Airbnb again just so I could take a shower.
Just for the shower.
I was I'm just going to stay in the shower all trip. So yeah.
That is awesome, man. They ought to have that on the reviews for the Airbnb. What kind of shower do they have?
I mean, they showed a picture of it, but you should have put that on the headline, best shower in Denver rated. What about you?
That's awesome, man. Well, we're a big Disney parks family, so we love to do that. We've done that quite a few times. Disneyland is the one that I like, which is funny. A lot of people are Disney World. It's a lot bigger and all that, but we really love going to Disneyland. It's kind of the original one, and the weather's better there because it's not as hot and humid, in Southern California. And so we went there last summer, so we're not going there this summer because can't really afford to, but we are going there coming up in November because my wife and I will be celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary, and so the two of us are going to go just just by ourselves without the kiddos.
Yes, you should.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So I'm super excited about that. But also, like I said earlier, I just enjoy the family time. And so I remember when, thinking about memories, I remember when we were first planting the church, and we didn't have very much money. And our church was only, let's see, we started the church in September. And so it would have only been about 9 months old or so, June, July of that next year. But it was like, man, we're going on vacation. Our girls were little. They were 3 and 2. And maybe at that time, maybe 4 and 3, something like that. But anyway, I got on Priceline and got a hotel, and it was like $35 a night for the hotel. And we were just balling on a budget, like just keeping it as cheap as we could get. And then we got there, and the hotel was kind of not that great. But it's one of my favorite vacation memories, though. We went to, where did we go? To SeaWorld with the girls, and they were little. And then we went to this super sketch kind of ghetto kind of a water park. And we knew we could see it, but the girls, they didn't know, and they loved it, man. They swam all over that place. And so some of my favorite memories, we didn't even spend very much money because we didn't have much, but awesome time together with our family. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So, and that's what I thought we'd talk about, not just about vacation, but that we would talk about in this podcast is we are heading into that summer season. The year's almost halfway over, and we ought to talk a little bit about the importance of rest. Yep. And so we thought we'd just talk about, we've all been tired. We've all worked hard and had those times where, ministry's busy, life is busy, family's busy, leadership can be heavy. Feels like the weight just kind of never ends. And it's really hard kind of sometimes to shut it off. And so sometimes even, you can go on vacation and not really rest. And so just thought we'd talk about that a little bit. You ever had a hard time shutting it off, just kind of resting?
Yeah. I mean, when I worked at Chick-fil-A, and then when I pastored before, and then coming into this summer, our schedule, our calendar looks different than, maybe a Sunday morning church.
Yeah.
And so summer is where things get really busy. So I have to be super careful, super intentional about finding moments of rest, especially like leading up to camp and missions trip, and then after camp and missions trip, because once those are over, we're going into the school year again.
Yeah.
And so it all kind of goes kind of back and forth. I know for myself, I used to really struggle with rest because I would work really hard during the day, and then I come home and I feel like I still needed to work.
Yeah.
And so I would just work at home. I'd work during work, and then on my days off, I would work as well.
Yeah.
And so I just felt like I couldn't turn it off, which I know for myself, I learned as a young pastor, as a young leader, sometimes I wouldn't actually work hard.
Yeah.
And so what I've learned is that if you don't work hard, you can't rest hard.
Yeah.
And so when I was at work, I wouldn't work hard. So when I came home, I felt like I had to work some more. And so I wasn't able to really rest. And so I've had to learn that lesson the hard way, coming into ministry again, learning if I can work hard while I'm at work, I'll quote unquote almost earn my rest. I'll earn the peace of mind.
Yeah.
Just when I'm off work. So
yeah, I think that's a good balance to think about before we dive into this idea of rest. Is everyone needs to rest, but in order to rest, you do need to work hard too. And I think there's two kind of sides that can happen. Is that there are some that their personality is more driven to just work all the time and never rest. And so a message like this or a podcast like this kind of helps to realize, hey, I'm going to get more out of my work if I learn how to rest. There are other people that, can tend to just not work very hard. And then they hear a message like this or a podcast like this, and they're kind of like, yeah, that's right. I can't wait to rest more. And here's the thing is, like, if I'm not working hard, then when I'm resting, it's not resting, it's being lazy, but if I've worked hard and I put everything that I can into doing what God has called me to do, then I have to have some times when I shut it off, when I rest. And, for me, I know that it's not always the work. It's more about the weight.
yeah.
And I know also, like I've said this a few times to people recently, the way that my work has become more is I have less things to do on my to-do list and more things on my to be responsible for list. Yeah. And so I know earlier in ministry, I had a ton of things on the list of things to do. I now have an incredible team, and Max, you're a part of that team. We have some amazing people who do a lot of the things that I used to do. So I don't have nearly as many things to check off my to-do list, but I have a whole lot more things that I am responsible for. And so the weight of that is kind of heavy at times, and it's hard to take that weight off. I know Pastor Scott, one of my mentors and pastors, he talks about going and working out with guys at CrossFit. He tells this story. He says one time he was there and they were doing the whole workout, the WOD or the workout of the day. Yeah. And he thought, wow, I'm not in nearly as good a shape as these guys, but I seem to be able to be keeping up with them today. Like, what's going on, man? I'm really getting strong or whatever. Yeah. And then at the end of the workout, he noticed that those guys, they took their shirt off, and underneath their shirt, they were wearing like a 25-pound weight. And all of a sudden he realized, that's why I was able to do what they were doing, because I wasn't wearing the same weight that they were wearing. And so I think sometimes you can feel that in ministry, and the more ministry you do, the more responsibility you get. It's not so much about, can I do the stuff? It's about, can I do the stuff while I'm carrying the weight of the responsibility of it? Yeah. And so for me, I know sometimes it's just a matter of, sometimes it is like I don't need anything on my to-do for the day list, but also sometimes it's just like I need to break away a little bit so that I can get away from some of the responsibilities of it. And I know that we tend to fill our lives with so much. We're just addicted to a busy, get stuff done type of a life. I was reading one time about that, and it talked about how there are some cases where your adrenaline, the gland that produces adrenaline, can actually shut down because you're doing so many things and releases all these hormones. And I'm not a doctor, so I don't understand all of that. But I know that when that happens, it can lead to depression and disease and all kinds of stuff that can happen if we don't learn how to rest. And so that's the thought, is that, it's dangerous to allow ourselves to be tired too much without resting. It's dangerous for us mentally, spiritually, physically, but also we become dangerous to others when we don't learn how to rest. So that's what I want to talk about today a little bit.
No, that's so good. I think if this podcast is, or this episode is about being tired because you're working too hard, then the absolute opposite would be true of if we did a podcast of we've all been lazy.
Yeah.
And it's not working hard enough.
Yeah.
And so I like how we're kind of hitting one pendulum swing here, but don't hear us and go like you said, like if you are being lazy or not working hard, we're not saying, well, then just keep doing that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, first we got to identify, are we working hard?
Mm-hmm.
If you're working hard, then yeah, that makes sense why you're feeling tired. But I know for myself, if I lounge around or like if I sleep too long, what happens to me? I get groggy, right? So I feel tired, but I'm tired because I've been being lazy.
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely. I know the longer that I lay in bed or the longer that I lay around, the less likely that I am to, it's that, what is that law? That's the law of motion or whatever. Like an object in motion tends to stay in motion. Yeah. An object that's not in motion tends to stay not in motion. Yeah. I'm sure that all the scientists out there are saying, you're saying that wrong. But the idea is like, if you're doing things, if you're working hard, if you are, carrying weight and giving energy, then you have to have some moments of sitting down and around and resting. And if you don't, it's dangerous to you and dangerous to others. So I wrote down 5 dangers of being tired or weary when it comes to especially leadership, because that's who we're really talking to on this podcast. So the first one is that when I'm tired, I have this tendency to let my guard down. And I came across this story. We were talking about it as we were prepping for the podcast in Judges. It's an interesting story, probably not real well-known story about this guy. His name is Sisera, and he's a commander of one of the Canaanite armies who had been kind of oppressing the Israelites. And so this guy is kind of a big deal. It says in there that he was in charge of 900 iron chariots. I mean, this guy he's if you
boss.
got 900 chariots, you've probably got thousands and thousands of warriors that you are in charge of. And he's been in this battle, and God allows them to be defeated, but Sisera escapes. And he runs to the house of this woman named Jael. And it's just crazy what happens here. In Judges chapter 4:17, I'll just read it. It says, Sisera, meanwhile, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. And Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right on in. Don't be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. And he said, "I'm thirsty. Please give me some water." So she opened up a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. And stood in the doorway of the tent. And he told her, "If someone comes by and asks you, is anyone here, just say no." But then this is where it gets crazy in verse 21. But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he was fast asleep, exhausted. Ouch. And she drove a peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. I mean, that's pretty graphic and pretty violent right there. But the thought when I read that came to mind is, here's this guy. He's obviously a great warrior, and not just a great warrior, but a great leader of warriors, 900 chariots that he's in charge of. And yet this guy is killed by this little housewife. And why is it? Well, I think it was because he got so exhausted and so tired that in that moment when he was tired, he let his guard down. And he went into this house of this woman. And he just wasn't thinking straight because he was so exhausted and he was so tired. And I think that's what happens a lot of times in ministry and in leadership. If we allow ourselves to run ourselves ragged and get so exhausted, sometimes we can let our guard down. We can end up doing stuff that hurts us and hurts others. That's when the enemy comes against us, when we're at our weakness or our weakest. He comes at those weak moments, and it's in those moments where we have those temptations and those things come. I mean, Jesus said in Luke 21, verse 34, "Be careful, or your hearts will be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the anxieties of life, and that day will close on you unexpectedly like a trap." So he says, hey, when you're tired, be careful. Don't get weighed down with the anxieties of life, because things can kind of come in unexpectedly if you're not paying attention in those moments. So when we're tired, we have a tendency to let our guards down.
Yeah. No, that's so good. I mean, that story, just watch where you sleep.
Yeah.
Watch where you get tired. And I think you have signs, like if you work hard to a certain extent, you're going to know, like, okay, I'm reaching my limit here. So where am I? Where am I as far as getting tired? Because just like the story, tells, because he was somewhere he didn't know, there was this opening that he was able to be killed. So,
yeah. How many guys do that, or ladies do that in leadership and ministry? They end up being in a place they shouldn't have been, doing something they shouldn't be doing, when they wouldn't probably have done that if they weren't so weary and worn and tired. So you got to be on your guard. Second thing I got here was that when I'm tired, my emotions are inconsistent. We've all probably done that before. Yeah. You're tired, you get cranky, you get moody, you end up snapping at the kids or snapping at your spouse, or sometimes somebody else says something to you and probably their motivation was right, but you took it the wrong way. So I'm going to just simply ask you, I've done this. I don't tend to really snap at my kids or the spouse all that much until I'm tired and they might ask a simple question. Then I'm like, what do you that kind of a thing. And I realized what was happening is that, man, I was cranky. I was tired. And so your emotions kind of can be all over the place. Elijah was tired from running around everywhere, and he got depressed. And Moses was tired from dealing with all of the Israelites and all their complaints and stuff, and so he got mad. And just when we get tired, it's harder to control our emotions, and that's never good when it comes to leadership, especially. You got to be in control of your emotions. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting that we talked about Moses. We talked about Moses a little bit today.
In prayer time. Yeah.
In prayer time. We should talk about Moses all the time.
Moses is good.
He's a great guy. But what we talked about is he was in charge of like 600,000 plus people, and we only know the like fighting men, like his army. It was
Yeah.
a 600,000, and so it's easy for us to go, man. Only weak people get tired. Only bad leaders get tired.
Yeah.
Moses was a great leader.
He was a great leader.
Like he led all those people out of Egypt, yada yada yada, right? All the different moments. And finally, like Moses is tired, you know? And so it's easy for us to look at the story of Moses and be like, man, this guy, like he just can't handle it. Like he's not as tough as me, right? I could do this. I can go longer than he can. And no, we all get tired. We all get tired.
Yeah, so we just have to know
Yeah.
when we're tired, because when we get tired, when we get worn out, man, we can do stuff, say stuff. Our emotions are all over the place. Nobody wants to follow a leader who's moody and who's inconsistent. Here's another one. When I'm tired, I'm less productive. I think sometimes we can think, well, I gotta power through. I just gotta push through. And sometimes there's just not a choice. Sometimes you do have to just push through. Sometimes there are seasons in ministry and in life where it's just like, this is the season that I'm in. I got to suck it up. We got to make it happen, knowing that this season's not going to last forever, that there's going to come another season that's a slower season, and maybe I can rest in those times. And so I've been through those times in ministry before where I just had to push through. I'm tired, but I got to suck it up. But that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
Over a long period of time. And when it comes down to it, if you're constantly living in that sort of a pace, eventually you don't produce. Eventually it's not very effective. There's this law called the law of diminishing returns. Yeah. And it basically just states that there's a point at which the level of profits or benefits gained is less than the amount of money or energy invested. So when you get to the law of diminishing returns, it's like, I'm still pushing and I'm still pressing through and I'm still giving the same amount of energy, but I'm getting less profit or benefit from it. And it would be better if I just stopped to rest and gain some more energy and then put that energy into it, and I would get better results. And so sometimes when we're tired, we just end up using more energy but experiencing less return. And it makes more sense to just go, hey, today I'm going to stop and rest so that tomorrow I will have the energy to do what I need to do then. And I might be able to put less energy into it and get better result because I took the time to rest.
Yeah.
You know?
There's something blessed about a Sunday nap.
There is something blessed about it. And as I've gotten older, the more I've realized I need that even more than I used to. So I didn't need it, but I find myself doing that regularly. But it is a refreshing sometimes.
Absolutely.
You come out and you're more energized. I mean, if my phone, is going dead, like, it's not going to do me any good to just run it till it dies. I got to plug it back into the wall for a little bit. And even if, even just plugging it in for a few minutes can gain. I got one of those fast chargers, so you can gain 30%, battery on the phone.
Yeah.
By just plugging it in for a little bit, and it'll go a little bit further. So that's good.
Yeah. One of the worst advices that I ever heard, on this idea of like being less productive, law of diminishing return, is fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And what happens is if you fake it so long, if you just keep working hard even while you're tired, you're going to reach that point that you're searching or working towards. But then the person that's there is not the healthy you. It's not the rested you. And so what happens is, like, that's not the person that God intended you to be in that spot. Like he fashioned you, he created you, he set the schedule and the week up in a certain way so that you would have time to rest. And so when we deny that rest, we get to that point, and now we faked it and we made it, but we're not rested. And so I know for me, I have to check myself and go, as much as I want to be at this certain point in ministry or in life or in our youth ministry, I have to go, well, I can't work myself to the ground, or when I get there, the person that's going to be there is not the person that God wanted to be there. I'm trying to do things on my own timeline.
Yeah, and God modeled that for us. And if you think about it, God didn't need rest. Yeah. He's, his power is without end. We read about that in Isaiah where, he doesn't get tired. He doesn't get weary, but he he modeled it for us that even though he didn't need rest, he could continue to create and continue to be powerful and effective because he never runs out of energy. And yet he still rested on the seventh day as a model for us, how we would live and how we would depend on him. And we'll get more into that a little bit later. But man, when I'm tired, I end up doing things I shouldn't do. I let my guard down. I'm not as effective. The fourth one, when I get tired, I can tend to forget my purpose.
Yep.
And I know I've done that before where, it just affects my attitude, or I just get discouraged, forget the why. I'm just like, sometimes you lose gratitude when you're weary and when you're tired, and you just, because you kind of forget why you're doing what you're doing. It reminds me of what the Hebrew writer said in Hebrews 12, where he just says, we fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. For the joy set out before him, he endured the cross, scorning the shame, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And we should consider him, it says, who endured such opposition from sinners, so that we will not grow weary and lose heart. And the part there that really sticks out to me as it pertains to this is that when we grow weary, what tends to happen? We tend to lose heart. And so sometimes when we're tired, when we're weary, we forget why we're doing what we're doing. We just we get our eyes off Jesus. We get our eyes off our purpose. We kind of lose heart. And then that leads to the fifth one, is that when I get tired, I can't hear God. And that's so much like when I got all this busyness and all this noise and I don't know how to slow down, it's hard to hear from God. It's hard to hear his voice. That's why the scripture says, be still and know that he is God. Sometimes it's just hearing his voice only happens in the stillness, in those moments when we're tired, we slow down to rest. It opens our ears to hear from God in a new and a fresh way. And that's what kind of reinvigorates that sense of purpose and meaning in us in leadership and in ministry. So did you have any more thoughts on that, Pastor Max, about just why it's dangerous to continue ministry when you're tired?
Yeah, I think when we're tired too often for too long, that gets taxing on our bodies. I've heard people say, and they're real tough guys when they say this, they say, I'll sleep when I'm dead, right? I don't know if we have any Bon Jovi fans. I'm not really, but he has this lyric that says, gonna live while I'm alive and I'll sleep when I'm dead. Yeah. And it's this whole idea of like, well, I'm going to work and work and work and work and work, and I'm going to get what I'm supposed to. And like, good for you, But if that's the way you're going to operate, then you may be dying a little sooner.
Yeah, you might be dead sooner than you want.
And it's, man, I know for myself, like I have to remind myself, it's like, as a young person, it's very easy for me to be hungry. Like I have my whole life ahead of me. And I have so much I want to do. I want to, by the age of 30, which is next year for me, or this year for me, I want to accomplish this. I want to have a family. I want to do these things. I'm trying to do things in a rushed way. And so the closer I get to that deadline, or the more I want that thing, I tend to like work myself so hard that it ends up being like a detriment to my health. Like my physical health suffers, whether it's stress on my body, mentally or physically, that again, God didn't intend for that. If I just rested when I was tired, I would be able to get to the place that God wanted me to get to in the time that he wants me to get there.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that causes us to do that, to be thirsty or to be hungry for those things, is sometimes I think we want to go after those things that God has for us, but we're not willing to get them in the timing that God has for us. And I believe that God does have incredible things for each one of us.
Absolutely.
But we're going to be able to receive them the best when we receive them in his timing. And again, we're going back to, we're not saying don't work hard, but we're also saying like you don't have to carry it so heavy, knowing that if I'll work hard and then I'll trust the Lord, he's going to come through in his way, in his timing. His plans are best for me, so I can rest in him. And that kind of leads me to, like, I just had a couple of maybe some practical things about rest, really kind of a couple things from the scripture that it says about rest, and then maybe getting into some practical things about how we can do better at resting as we head into the summer season, or whatever the resting season might look like for you. So the first thing I had was just that rest is a command.
Yep.
It's one of the 10 commandments. And I don't have a lot on this other than to say that if I were putting together a list of the top 10 things commanded that you would do as a leader, as someone who's driven, as someone who wants to make things happen, I probably wouldn't put rest in my top 10 things that I would command people to do. So it's interesting that God would if he's going, here's 10 things and you got to only do these, there's other things too, but these are the top 10.
Yeah.
One of them is rest. It's just interesting, man. That must be pretty important. And it's one of the most broken of all of the commandments among people that are in ministry for sure.
Yeah.
So rest is a command. Number 2, rest is a trust. This one is where I think what you were talking about and what we were kind of hinting at a minute ago is that rest is really, it's trusting that God is working even when I'm not. That I can rest because I trust that I'm not the one who's making it all happen. Yes, what I do is important, but I'm trusting him to do it even when I'm not doing it. I'm trusting his promises. I kind of think it's a little bit like tithing. With tithing, what I'm doing is I'm trusting that if I give God 10% of my income, he's going to bless and multiply the other 90% and make it go further than the 10% ever would have went on its own. Sabbath and rest is kind of that same way. It's going, if I give God one day, then he's going to take the other 6 days and multiply them and make my work go further than it ever would have went if I tried to do work every day of the week, or even when it comes to a daily thing. If I'm going to take some time in the evening to rest, I'm going to trust that he's multiplying the rest of that time because he's working even when I'm not. So
good.
So rest is a trust. Number 3, rest is a necessity. I think that's important because your body was made to need rest. You can't function without it. If you're not getting sleep, if you're not taking time to rest and to recuperate and to recharge, eventually your body's going to shut down. I put it in my notes. I will get rest whether I take it or not. And it's much better to have voluntary rest than involuntary rest.
That's so good.
And I think so many people have been there before where they've not taken the time to take care of their body, to rest, and then the body ends up just kind of shutting down, or they burn out, those kinds of things. I thought this was interesting. I came across this from Kerry Newhoff. He had a blog post. I'll just read this little portion from it. But it says, even though God mandated regular rest, there's very little evidence that the Israelites took him up on this advice. The Sabbath was probably broken more than it was observed. And most people believe that the Sabbath of Sabbaths, which is the year of Jubilee, where work was to shut down for a full year every 50th year, was actually never even celebrated. And that's actually not true if you consider this. In 2 Chronicles 36 and verse 21, it says, "So the message of the Lord spoke through Jeremiah was fulfilled, and the land finally enjoyed its Sabbath rest, lying desolate until the 70 years were fulfilled, just as the prophet had said." So here's what he's saying. He's saying that, he says, did you hear that? I mean, seriously, did you actually see what God is saying there? He's basically pointing out that if you don't take rest, rest will take you. Israel never celebrated the Jubilee, so God said, I'll make you take it. You'll be invaded against your will, and you'll be in exile for 70 years. There's your Sabbath. There's your Jubilee. And I read that, and I thought, isn't that so true in our day and age as well, that if we don't take God up on this command, that eventually, like, if we don't take rest, rest will take us. And so many people end up getting burned out, fizzling out of ministry, leadership, burned out on their family, all those kind of things, because they didn't abide by this command that's not just a command. It's actually, that's the next point. It's a gift. God wants to give us that gift of rest. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I know for me, I've come to realize that God knows us better than we know ourselves. I think I know what my body and my mind and my spirit need, but really the Lord does, you know? And so when he sets these things up, they're guardrails for when you start veering off the road. He's like, well, you may not get in an accident right now, but you do that long enough and like your tires will blow out, right? Or you're going to suffer some serious damage in your car. But this analogy of, man, if I just trust the Lord with what he's told me, then I'll be fine. Like if I just rest, I'll be okay.
Yeah, his ways are always just better.
True.
And that's a great way to look at rest is like, yes, it is a command. Yes, it is a necessity, but it's a gift.
Yeah.
It's something that God gave us to be able to use for our benefit. It's not, we're not talking here about Sabbath like it's something that's a legalistic thing. It's more of a, no, this is something that's good for you. You know, Mark 2:12 or 2:27, Jesus says Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So many times some people can get really legalistic. Well, it has to be on Saturday or it has to be on whatever, and you have to do it every week and all that. But what it really is is for our benefit. God gives us rest so that we can be at our best. And it's a great strategy for how to live, because especially for high achievers, you know, if we realize that a rested me is the best me, I'm going to be at my best in my relationships, in my work, in my family, and everything that I do. When I'm rested, I'm going to be at my best. It actually becomes a great strategy for achieving more for the kingdom and the glory of God, because I'm at the best. I'm at 100%, and whenever I'm at 100%, I can give more, and I can do more, and I can achieve more, and I can do more for God. And when I'm, you know, depleted, then I'm not going to be able to be as effective. So just receiving it and going, God, thank you for an incredible gift that you have given us to be able to rest and to be able to be rejuvenated to do what you called us to do. So practical.
Yeah.
How do we put this into practice in our own lives? I added something here. I'll just hit it real fast. All right. I love this. A great rhythm for rest is to divert daily, withdraw weekly, disconnect quarterly, and abandon annually. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So here's how it goes.
I like that.
Every day I'm going to divert. And every day I'm going to have some way of kind of resting my mind, resting my body. You know, it might be that at night I'm watching a show before I go to bed or whatever, you know. And then I'm going to withdraw weekly. So that's a Sabbath. That's like I'm going to set aside for me Fridays are my Sabbath. I don't work on Fridays. But then I'm going to disconnect quarterly. So that means it might be a day or two away that I'm going to get away and I'm going to disconnect. Sometimes for me what that is it's more of a vision kind of a retreat where I'll go away and I'm not working on what I work on here. I'm just working on spending time with God and getting some vision for the future. And then I'm going to abandon annually. Every year I'm just like, I'm out of here. It's vacation and we're gone. And if you keep that rhythm, it does tend to help you stay in a place of rest.
That's really good, because I think Jesus does something similar to that.
He does.
He would constantly pull away and pray. Like he would do that constantly.
Well, every morning, early in the morning, it says he would pray.
Yeah, he would just pull away. Like he would just make time in his day, and then the 40 days, right? It's like it's funny you say all this thing. And it's like, you know, Jesus had his like season of obscurity too. You know, years where he like was we don't know, you know, and so it's cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. So when you're resting, just a couple practical things that we've got to do is we got to rest our mind. I know in a ministry job, it's very mental. And so it's not like we're not busting rocks or anything like that. It's not anything physical that we're doing. What we're mostly doing is mental type of a work. So I know when your work is mental, what you need to rest is you need to rest your mind. And so sometimes resting mentally actually comes from doing something physical. If it was the opposite, I'd say, you know, rest your body, which we'll talk about that in a minute. So, but if you were doing physical labor, then you might rest your body. But in ministry and leadership, it's a lot of times our minds, and so you got to rest mentally a little bit. So do some things that get your hands moving. Get a hobby, you know, ride your bike, play golf, do something, you know, whatever. Get out, get some exercise. Work on, sometimes for me, it's also work on something different. I know that I used to coach at do a table coach thing for the church multiplication network. Mm-hmm. And that was always very restful because I'm working on somebody else's problems and not my own, And it's always easier to see clearly, well, here's what you need to do for somebody else than it is whenever I'm working on my own. So you rest mentally, and one of the ways is do something different than what you normally would be doing. Another one is to rest your body. I know I just said ministry is not physical as much, but our bodies do get tired. For a season, for about 4 years, we had 3 services every Sunday. So I preached 3 times every Sunday. I get tired, Even now with 2 services on Sunday, it's actually a physically taxing thing. I get headaches, or my legs get tired from standing up and just doing what we do every Sunday. So I think that's important. Get some sleep. Go to bed at night. Turn off the Netflix, or turn off the video games,
not
or
my Netflix.
put down the Facebook and Instagram, and get some sleep. So I think that's important.
Yeah.
Then number 3, rest your emotions. This is important, I think. To have somebody to talk to. We talked about that, going to counseling and things like that. But it can be friends and people in your life. That I think emotional rest for me comes from being with people that I love. Being with my family, being with friends, talking to people that can help me talk through some of those things. Also, I think a big one is resolving your conflicts quickly, because nothing weighs on your emotions more than unresolved conflict. And when you have these open loops, and boy, that can be heavy. And so sometimes it's letting that go. Sometimes it's setting the right, healthy expectations for yourself or for others that can just bring rest mentally. Yeah. And the last one is rest your soul. I think sometimes we can be weary, and it has nothing to do with our mind or our body. Sometimes it has to do with our soul. What's going on inside of here. Psalm 61 verse 2 says, my soul finds rest in God alone. My salvation comes from him. And so there's no person, there's no thing, there's no experience, there's no vacation, there's no accomplishment, there's no amount of money. There's nothing outside of God that's going to bring true rest really in our souls, except for a relationship with God. St. Augustine said, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our soul is restless until we find rest in you. So we just, like what Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest.
Yeah.
We can look towards so many other things, but he's the only one that's going to give rest for our souls.
I love what, the scripture says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light, and I know as yourself, I love that you talked about, like, you may not be quote unquote doing as much, but you're carrying more, and I think that's like a perfect analogy of being the leader. And even the example of Pastor Scott, seeing what you see may look like they're not carrying much, right? But you're holding a lot. Like there's a weight on you, and so understanding that weight isn't yours to hold, right? It's the Lord who carries that, right? His yoke is easy, his burden is light. His ministry, he's saying his ministry, and I'm like, Jesus, like, people were trying to stone you. Like, you were saying some pretty controversial stuff. You hung on a cross, but he says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. And if I can follow Jesus and pick up that yoke and that quote unquote burden, man.
Yeah, and there's a rhythm to it.
Yeah.
One of the thoughts on that yoke thing is that, he says, be yoked with me, take on my yoke. When you take 2 oxen and you put them together, you put a yoke, one on each.
Yeah.
And if one oxen tries to go out ahead of the other one, it's frustrating. Yeah. You don't get anywhere. And I think a lot of the times that we get tired and we run around and we spin around in circles and we don't get anywhere is we're out of rhythm with God. We're trying to go ahead of him. And so putting on his yoke is going, I'm going to walk at the same pace that he's walking.
That's so good.
And then that way I'm not having to carry it all by myself. He's carrying it with me, and we're going at the same pace. And as we go at the same pace, that's easy and that's light and that's not a burden. But if I'm trying to rush out ahead of God, then I'm not going to be rested. It goes back to what you were saying. Like, we are driven and we do want to make things happen.
Yeah.
But when we get outside of the rhythm of, I think it says it like that in the Message version, something about like walk in rhythm with me, the rhythms of grace.
Yeah.
And that rhythm is restful, whereas our crazy busy get out there and make things happen is not restful, it's stressful, and we get weary and tired and we get out of rhythm with him.
Yeah. So good. Anything else?
No, this has been good. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I do hope you get to have some rest this summer or whenever you're watching or listening to the podcast. We really are thankful for you joining us, and we want to hear from you. So let us know how things are going and what God is doing in your life.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining us. We will see you next month.